In August of 1932, the outlaws known as Bonnie and Clyde, that's Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, came to Carlsbad, New Mexico, looking for a place to disappear. They had reasons to, because days earlier in Stringtown, Oklahoma, Clyde and Raymond Hamilton had shot two lawmen at a country string dance. Deputy Eugene Moore was dead and Sheriff C.G. Maxwell was badly wounded. The whole region was looking for them, so Bonnie had an aunt near Carlsbad. Nellie Parker Stamps lived on a farm a few miles outside of town, and that farm looked exactly what Clyde needed. Family, it was out of the way, and it was far from the heat in Texas and Oklahoma. The three of them moved in for a few days. The problem, though, was the car. Clyde was driving a stolen Ford V8, and Carlsbad in 1932 was a place where stolen cars got noticed. When Clyde and Hamilton drove into town to pick up some ice, the out-of-state plates caught the eye of the local law. Word got back to Eddy County Sheriff Office that there was a suspicious car out at the Stamps place. Well, there's something else working against them, too. Nellie Stamps had grown frightened of the men that her niece brought to her home, and she got word to authorities herself. Either way, the results were the same. A lawman was coming out to the farm to ask about that car. The lawman was Chief Deputy Sheriff Joe Johns. On the morning of August the 14th, 1932, Joe Johns drove out of the Stamps farm. He went up there alone. He had done this kind of thing many times. Apparently there's always kinds of weird cars, so I guess they had car phobia. Well, Johns was an experienced lawman. He had already served as sheriff of Eddy County and would hold 6 different public offices in his life. He had aspirations. A car with strange plates at a local farm was routine work, as I said, because they had car phobia. He pulled up and looked at the Ford. He looked through the windows and he could see the back seat, and the back seat told him there was not a routine at all. It was full of rifles and pistols. Johns walked up to the house and knocked, and Bonnie answered the door. Johns asked whose car was parked outside, and Bonnie was calm and polite. She told him it belonged to a couple of boys, that they were getting dressed, and she would send them right on out. Well, that sounded ordinary, but it wasn't because of all those guns and firearms in that truck, the back seat, right? Where I come from, we put them in trucks, but yeah, they didn't have one, I guess. Not a V8 Ford. Well, it was a signal to the men inside when she said that the law was at the door. Inside, Clyde and Hamilton were caught off guard. Their handguns and sawed-off shotguns were, you guessed it, locked in the trunk of the car out of reach where Johns was standing. Clyde searched the house and found a shotgun in a closet. Then he and Hamilton came around the side of the house pretty fast and got the drop on Johns before the deputy could react. Johns tried to run. Clyde gave him a warning shot. Blast went close enough to knock the hat clean off of his head. I don't know if it was a warning shot or he just missed. Anyway, Hamilton took the deputy's service revolver, and in a matter of seconds, the lawman who had come to ask a few questions was a prisoner of the Barrow Gang. They worked quietly after that, and they were pretty quick about it. They disabled John's cruiser so no one could follow. They cut the phone lines to the Stamps house so that no one could call ahead. Then they put Joe Johns in the car, not the trunk, in the car, and they drove. What followed was a drive of nearly 20 hours. They took Johns out of New Mexico way and headed for Texas, aiming roughly for San Antonio, hundreds of miles to the southeast of where they were. Johns later described the trip in detail. He sat wedged in the back seat between Clyde Barrow and Raymond Hamilton. Bonnie sat on Hamilton's lap, and she kept a gun pressed into John's ribs. That's uncomfortable kind of traveling, if you ask me. Now, the car was loaded with rifles and pistols, so John noted they had no machine guns at that point, and he was guarded the entire time, so he couldn't reach out and touch one of those firearms. He said he was certain that if he had made a move, they had shot him. Because they already shot the hat off of his head, and I still believe that was probably a miss. Well, the drive didn't go smoothly for the gang. Not very smooth at all. By John's account, they had 7 flat tires along the way, which slowed them down badly and stretched the trip out far longer than it should have taken. They slept in shifts, so someone was always watching him, and someone was driving, I guess. And at one point, they tried to steal another car to replace their worn-out Ford, but that didn't work out. There was one moment that Johns never forgot because it could have cost the lives back in Carlsbad. Clyde and Hamilton were angry at Nellie Stamps for reporting them to the law, and they talked about turning around and going back and whacking her. Johns talked them out of it. Years later, he said that was exactly what happened, and that the outlaws wanted to go back for Bonnie's aunt and argued against it until they left it and let it go. For the better part of a day and a night, Joe Johns rode with 3 of the most wanted people in South the West, not knowing where they were taking him or whether they meant to let him live or not. While Johns was riding around, while he was doing his joyride in the back of that Ford, something happened far behind him that turned the whole story strange. This is where we get into it, folks. 2 truck drivers came across a body on the side of the road about 90 miles from El Paso, and it didn't have a head. Word of it spread fast, and the conclusion seemed obvious. A New Mexico deputy had been kidnapped by the Barrow Gang, and now someone without a head had turned up along the route that they were believed to have taken. Well, authorities put 2 and 2 together, and they come up with one body without a head. And they decided that the gang had whacked Joe Johns and dumped his body. A manhunt went out for the murder of a deputy who was, at that very moment, still very much alive, but sitting in the back of a car with some killers. It took further investigation to untangle this mess. The body was not John's at all. You and I already know that. It was a hitchhiker, unconnected to the kidnapping, found by coincidence in roughly the wrong place at the wrong time, especially if you're the hitchhiker. But for a stretch there, the official story was that Joe Johns didn't have a head anymore. Somebody took his head off. Johns himself only learned about it afterwards. The newspaper later reported that he was mystified by the accounts of his own death, because he shows up and they're like, "Hey, you're supposed to be dead." He looks at them and says, "Well, I ain't." Well, he had spent those hours fearing for his life inside the car, with no idea that on the outside people already buried him in his minds. Well, their minds. So, near San Antonio, the gang finally stopped. They had threatened to whack him a couple times during the trip, but by his account, Bonnie talked him out of it and convinced them to let him go unharmed. Now, before they drove off, they asked Johns if he had enough money to get back to Carlsbad, and if he didn't, they told him, "Oh, we can get you some damn quick." And they put him out on the road and left, like, people do their stray dogs out in the country, but don't do that to yours, because just don't. Johns was let go about 15 miles outside of that city limits that he was outside of. He walked to the nearest home, roughly a mile, and from there he reported to the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. Then he went home, so the dead man had come back. Not that he was ever dead, but some people thought he was. And the people that took him, they stayed on the run. Joe Johns outlived all of them by decades. He went on to serve again as sheriff of Eddy County, then as chief of police of Carlsbad, then as county treasurer and assessor. He lived into 1970, dying at the age of 84 from injuries from a car wreck. When he died, the headline of his obituary still reached back to that one day in 1932. It read that the former deputy had once been held by Bonnie and Clyde. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next episode of The Hidden Lens.